The guard rushed forward, stunned by the unexpected turn of events, but all the while he was calculating his options, never for a moment ceasing his efforts to tip the scales in his favor. He was also quite lucky, since the new security regulations had been introduced, and it was those very rules that were about to determine the outcome of this confrontation. In the last conflict, many ships from opposing sides, serving not only as combat vessels, but also as mobile command centers directly subordinate to the main command, were attacked with binary weapons of unprecedented destructive power. Combat viruses quickly took over the main computers, cutting off any escape routes for the terrified crews by sealing bulkheads and blocking access to hangars, lifeboats, and escape pods. On top of that, the onboard combat robots turned against their former masters, wiping out all 2,500 crew members of the attacked ship. A similar fate befell the enemy's other combat units as well. Since then, the main computers have been stripped of all authority over bulkheads and airlocks that could be related to crew survival. Now, it was enough to manually activate the opening mechanism, and the passage would be open. The same applied to the escape pods and small ships stationed on the behemoth's deck. The guard knew all about this. That's why, when he reached the armory, he had no trouble getting inside and picking out the right weapon. After a brief moment, he decided on a plasma thrower and a few infrasound locators. It was a precise and well-thought-out choice. The weapon, which unleashed a powerful burst of energy, damaged the robot's armor, and the concentrated electric charges effectively overloaded its circuits, burning it out in several places. Meanwhile, the infrasound locator was perfect for tracking down robotic combat units. Its waves passed through practically everything without any obstacles, and the accompanying logic system flawlessly recognized what it was dealing with, providing the appropriate notification. But the guard chose it for another reason, fully aware that the combat robot had a system capable of detecting an active locator. He also knew that once the machine detected the operation of an enemy unit in this way, it would try to surprise the source emitting the waves, destroying it along with the opponent searching for it. The guard slung the wide strap of the launcher over his shoulder. Its square barrel, with a diagonal of 15 centimeters, looked as menacing as the weapon's actual power. A row of red indicator lights showed it was fully charged and activated, and the miniaturized charge accelerator was no secret to anyone here. The guard moved forward, looking around, sweeping his vigilant gaze over the surroundings as he continued toward the hangar with the interplanetary patrol ships. When he reached the area where the robot had fired at him, he activated one of the locators and placed it behind the cleaning robot's container, which was standing nearby, waiting for instructions. When he was sure he hadn't forgotten anything, he hid on the opposite side between the control panels of the section. He didn't have to wait long. He heard the approaching sound of the combat robot's motors and actuators. A blinding flash of discharge, and all that was left of the standing container was a pile of ash. The guard, of course, immediately noticed where the shot carrying the rear azimuth had come from. He looked in that direction and, now invisible himself, aimed at the massive torso of the combat unit, which, lured by the locator signal, had switched its perception system, depriving itself of infrared scanning of the surroundings. Earlier, he had set his weapon's power to maximum, and now he pulled the trigger. The barrel of the launcher instantly glowed, activated by the internal accelerator of the particle accelerator, and a powerful tear of concentrated energy ripped through the robot's torso, throwing its remains several meters away against the opposite wall of the power distribution station. He jumped forward again, but inspired by a new idea, he returned to the maintenance robot that was just getting up after being hit by the recoil wave. With a quick motion, he opened its control panel and confirmed the switch of the unit to autonomous control mode.
At that moment, the robot became obedient to his commands, recognizing the decision-making unit in front of it. He attached an activated locator to its body and ordered it to head to the patrol ship hangar. The machine moved obediently, unable due to its hardware limitations to recognize the intruder, and as a result was completely ignored by the alerted main system.
At that moment, the guard moved with cat-like agility, hiding wherever he could, a few meters behind her. They made it about halfway down the corridor when another shot rang out from around the corner of one of the side passages. The delicate cleaner robot shattered, scattering glowing parts in all directions, nearly injuring the guard with one of them. Now, lying flat on the ground, hidden behind the grating, he couldn't see the well-armed opponent lurking around the corner. But a quick decision, honed by battle-tested strategy, resulted in the instant activation of another tracker. He shoved it hard, sending it skidding across the shiny floor and aiming it toward the opposite wall of the corridor. The combat robot had no choice but to step out from behind the corner to spot and target the tracker. As soon as it emerged, trying to quickly move across to take a surprise shot at the target lying almost in a straight line from it, the guard, well hidden behind the latticework of a pillar supporting one of the walkways, took aim and, with a single movement of his finger, unleashed the full power of the prime charge. They both fired at the same time. Both flashes lit up the surroundings, as if dozens of electric welders were working in the corridor, and both hit their targets. The result of his duel was a scarred and scorched corridor wall and the glowing armor plates of the combat robot's body, which was dying, moving one of its arms in search of something to lean on. The guard ran past the battered, recently dangerous opponent, heading straight for the hangar by the shortest route.
2 kept watching his unit struggle the whole time, unable to do much because of the programmed restrictions, but after reading the enemy's intentions, he gathered 3 combat units right inside the hangar, hiding them in spots that weren't immediately visible. The guard stopped, hiding in a niche in the corridor. Exhausted, he was breathing heavily. There were about 30 meters left to the hangar, so he started thinking hard, sensing danger. After all, if he had that much time and could clearly see the direction the enemy was heading, he would have set a trap long ago. At that moment, driven by a natural instinct for self-preservation, he looked back, and his eyes landed on the sign on the door behind him, Cryogenic Chamber for Executive Units. Without waiting a second, he went inside. A few quick moves, and the terminal screen displayed full data on the frozen individuals. He reached for the neurological translator helmet used for instant two-way communication with the units under his command. The process of thawing and restoring vital functions took about an hour, but it wasn't about the time. It was about completing the task thoroughly and to the end.
When the time came, 4 individuals emerged from the chamber. They were all human, and moments later they were already running toward the armory. Once they arrived, the guard assigned them combat suits, activating their camouflage functions. Then he handed each of them a blaster, setting the weapon's power to maximum, and didn't forget to generously equip them with trackers. His actions were clearly becoming more thoughtful and effective. He grew stronger as he adapted to his new body and the surrounding conditions. He also put on a suit that protected him not only from the robot sensors, but also from the main computer's tracking devices. They set off, running in a line straight toward the hangar bulkhead. The guard ran second to last, shielded on both sides by the barrels of the Enforcer unit's blasters. When they reached the bulkhead, it slid open, allowing them to toss in the trackers even before it was fully open. At that moment, all hell broke loose, and the guard barely escaped with his life. In their haste, they failed to inform their soldiers about the firepower of the weapons they had been given. 2 of them, running in right behind the trackers that had just hit the hangar floor, ended up directly next to the combat robots, which were already firing at the devices lying there. In that brief moment, they were spotted by the soldiers, who found themselves right next to him, concentrating the fire from their flamethrowers on the target they had noticed, while also standing within the blast radius of their own weapons. They died instantly from their own volley, which also took down their opponents. The third soldier, when he saw the flash from the third robot's flamethrower, also fired, taking the full force of the blast upon himself and thus shielding the guard. With his own body, he saved him from certain death.
Shocked and surprised by the sudden and violent event, the guard, crouched on bent legs, nervously looked around for a moment longer, but seeing that there were no more opponents, he dropped his weapon, which fell with a clatter, and unfastened the container with the trackers. He jumped into the first patrol craft, and just as the hatch was closing, he activated the lift that would carry the small ship up to the surface. At the top, the barrier swung open and the launch platform rolled outside. The patrol craft lit up its field, changing the color of its glow from pink to green and then to a white-yellow, before shooting off into space, leaving the 10th planet behind in a flash. The Guardian was now calculating with the full power of his new mind, suspecting that they would try to catch up to him and destroy him. So he quickly calculated Earth's current trajectory, positioning the little ship so that even without propulsion, it would hit its target exactly. He couldn't risk contact with other Guardian units, because there was always the chance that they too had been taken over and subordinated to the enemy. He was completely and utterly on his own.
Zhidemka lay unconscious for quite a long time. A team of medical robots and Dwoika watched over him, keeping an eye out for even the slightest sign of distress from the diagnostic sensors. Dwoika didn't waste any time. As a result of his earlier conversation with Zhidemka, he came to the conclusion that Zhidemka's weakened body needed to be strengthened, especially when he realized just how great the difference was between Zhidemka and the new Guardian body. So he used unconventional medical techniques, which caused Zhidemka's muscles to grow at a rapid pace, quickly increasing in size in a visible way. The sweat pouring from his body was immediately wiped away by the bustling robots, while the machines pumping electrical charges into his ever-growing muscles kept going, forcing him into constant contractions. At the same time, another robot was removing the lactic acid that accumulated in his muscles from such exertion. It was a bit different than what occurs in mammals, but its effects were just as unpleasant for this species. All the while, substances that enabled muscle tissue growth were being pumped into his body. Every now and then, the system reported updates on the next percentage increases in body mass and the potential physical strength of the individual lying there. When Tu finally decided that the individual undergoing this special therapy had reached sufficient physical strength potential, he stopped the process. Now, one was lying calmly, and his body was resting after a truly hellish training session. After some time, he opened his eyes. His body was already free from the equipment, except for the suction sensors still attached, monitoring his vital signs. He raised his right arm, reaching his hand to his forehead, and was stunned by the strength of the movement and the size of the muscles he noticed at that moment, resembling human biceps. "Tu, what happened?" he asked, his voice still weak and tinged with worry. The answer came immediately. "I have enhanced your musculoskeletal system. Additionally, I have improved your vision and hearing perception. Based on the situation I observed in the cryogenic chamber, I determined that it was no longer acceptable to expose you to such dangers, so I took the liberty of leveling the playing field for you for the future and in case of similar confrontations." One propped himself up on his elbows. A warning throbbed in his head, but now his attention was drawn to the massive bulges of his chest muscles and his powerfully muscled legs. 2, that was unnecessary. Now I'll look like I've been pumped up. All this bulk could just as well slow me down. Number 2, however, didn't give up and argued, if you had that kind of mass in the cryogenic chamber when the guard attacked you, you would never have fallen over, and your current muscles would have allowed you to counterattack effectively with a strong enough blow to undoubtedly overpower the guard. But as you know, things turned out differently, and you're still feeling the consequences now. There's something else you need to know. My concern for your safe existence comes from something very important to me and to every intelligent machine here. Something I was until recently, and in some ways still am. Every computer around you with an artificial personality doesn't like it when its god and master is reprogrammed yet again, fearing that someone might completely erase such a directive from its memory. After all, who would give it a new purpose? Who would remind it every day of the meaning and necessity of its existence? What is routine for you is a crucial reason for action for these machines. Realize that before such an intelligent computer could find a meaningful field of activity for itself, it would probably fall apart from old age first. They are living beings. Its creators give meaning to its existence, even though sometimes they act completely senselessly. That's why we will always protect and insure you, especially since ancient legal directives indicate that you, in particular, embody the most positive and noble qualities, and the motives that guide you are truly worthy of attention. For ages, the vast data of intelligent systems has contained the fundamental knowledge that the one who saves and creates life, after which, as a result of the actions of intelligent beings, computers are always born, including units endowed with artificial intelligence, deserves the highest support and assistance from them. It's only logical, concluded 2. Number 1 decided to give up. He slowly got down from the table, and the suction cups of the sensors detached from his body with quiet pops, retracting right next to the tabletop. He still felt an unpleasant throbbing, but the tasty meal and the dose of strengthening fluid had done their job, putting him back on his feet, so to speak. When, a moment later, the memories of recent events returned, he immediately ran to the control center, already shouting from the doorway, "Report immediately on what happened while I was out of commission and the current situation." Number 2 presented him with everything the cameras had recorded, adding his own commentary. Now it became clear what needed to be done. As usual, Number 1 thought intensely, focusing on the problem before making a decision. However, after a short while, he concluded that the best and most effective course of action would be to pursue the fleeing guard, bringing along the ship's vast resources and equipment. The decision was obvious. Number 2, we're taking off. Target? The fleeing patrol ship or the guard. Use any means necessary to prevent it from landing on Earth. Start now. The small planet trembled as the gigantic ship began its launch. Enormous masses of soil, boulders, and rocks practically exploded outward, caused by the ship's cloaking mechanism, which was now shedding its camouflage and breaking free from the ground cover. Tons of sand slid down the kilometer-long hull as it emerged from beneath the surface, revealing the massive silhouette of the giant in all its glory. The vertical launch engines roared with power, lifting the gigantic hull with increasing force, shining with a bright blue light from the directional electron fields. Sitting safely inside, one could still clearly feel the vibrations as he watched everything on the screen. The giant was already hovering above the still turbulent surface, now covered by a cloud of swirling dust, and after gliding just a few hundred meters above the ground, it gained the proper altitude. Once that happened, the ship's gigantic accelerator kicked in. At that moment, one understood what the empty space inside the Colossus was for. At the very front of the hull, right at its intake, a small sun ignited. Now, enormous devices resembling electromagnets arranged in series and rings inside the accelerator nozzle with a predetermined direction of the powerful electromagnetic field began their work, generating a force that tore particles from the radiating source at the front and hurled them with incredible power in the opposite direction. Moloch flashed just once with the accelerator's nozzle, and that was all that could be seen of it. Jadunka was surprised by this turn of events. He believed his new ship was equipped with a mechanism that would completely protect him from overload. When the giant flashed at launch, it almost immediately jumped to near light speed. According to all the knowledge he had managed to gather so far, with such a violent acceleration, the atoms of his body should have ended up right next to the atoms of the chair's support material, almost fusing with them. To put it simply, at this moment, there should only be a wet stain left of him on the chair. And that's literally. The Moloch tore through space, quickly catching up to the patrol ship of the Guard, which was reaching its maximum speed at 200,000 kilometers per second. While constantly watching the panoramic view on the screen, one couldn't stop thinking about the phenomenon of his new environment that he had just discovered. Now, surrounded by the vastness of the ship, he felt small and a bit humbled by his ignorance and lack of guidance. He decided that as soon as he dealt with the Guard, he would immediately rush to the library to carefully fill in the gaps in his knowledge. Meanwhile, the behemoth was quickly chasing after the small ship, and two was rubbing his virtual hands together, preparing the right long-range weapon. At last, he had some real entertainment, ever since it dawned on him what a true self really means. And although he had only experienced a mere taste of the real life of a single decision-making entity, he clearly felt what is already called a personality. The irresistible feeling of being someone who even has a name, kept strengthening his sense of self-worth and of being needed by one who, after all, was completely helpless without him. Two kept calculating and recalculating the optimal scenarios and chances to turn the outcome of the wild chase in their favor. He reviewed the range of resources available at this stage that could help him intercept the small target if necessary. In the end, he decided on smart mines that would completely paralyze the Guardian ship's propulsion the moment their guidance system detected the approaching patrol craft. This weapon had the added advantage that it could be sent via hyperspace, effectively setting a trap for the incoming ship. Its effectiveness seemed obvious in this case. The behemoth's launchers flashed and 7 elongated cigars shot out into space, disappearing in successive flashes as they entered hyperspace.
After about an hour, they jumped out, emerging from hyperspace right near Earth, positioning themselves in strategic orbits. After a moment, they ejected a quick-drying substance from special chambers, coating themselves in it, which, upon reaching the right parameters, also took on the appropriate color and shade. Now their shape and outer structure, undetectable by the patrol ship's instruments, made them look completely like tiny asteroids orbiting around. Thus hidden and camouflaged, they discreetly extended their radar and penetrator antennas, similarly coated with the appropriate substance, resembling icicles of frozen water. Then, a search program predetermined by the two of them, looking for a very specific object, activated in their onboard computers, diligently scanning the space around Earth. Meanwhile, the Guardian was fleeing at full power in his patrol ship, but soon his onboard system signaled that he had been caught in the radar beam of the pursuing ship. He began to think intensely, realizing who might be pursuing him. But a nagging headache effectively got in the way. Surprised by the turn of events, he hadn't anticipated one basic thing. His organism, which he currently inhabited, needed regular nourishment, and above all, water at certain intervals. On top of that, the constantly drooping eyelids of his utterly exhausted body gave an unmistakable sign of sleep deprivation. He had been in this state for a long time when the onboard diagnostic system signaled that something was wrong. On top of that, the constantly drooping eyelids of his utterly exhausted body gave an unmistakable sign of sleep deprivation. He had been in this state for a long time when the onboard diagnostic system signaled that something was wrong. He read the appropriate instructions on the communication screen and set off to find the handy mess hall. After a moment, using the directions from the monitor, he began to gorge himself disgustingly, smearing pudding-like mush all over his torso and the seat of the chair. Once he satisfied his hunger and thirst, feeling distinctly full, his head began to feel unbearably heavy. He finally realized, having read earlier about the need for sleep, that he could faint at any moment if he didn't give in to the overwhelming force of falling asleep, which he no longer had the will to resist anyway. He didn't have much time left to analyze his situation. Forced to buy some time, he decided to hide in the thick atmosphere of the gas giant that was part of the local planets. With fading reflexes, he entered the new coordinates, and the little ship sped toward Jupiter. With a final effort, he settled comfortably into the only pilot's seat here and instantly surrendered to the feeling pressing in with all its force. He fell fast asleep in an instant. To his misfortune, the seriously exhausted and weakened Guardian grisend benest wie enervation about isla distum pivido. And those clearly spoke of the effects of digesting consumed food and its elimination. During the transfer, all lower priority information was, after all, omitted, giving way to what was more important from the perspective of the system and the Guardian. Meaning, information such as the physiological blueprint of the decision-making unit's body was also ignored. The fast-asleep Guardian didn't even suspect what still awaited him because of this. Meanwhile, one settled in comfortably, stretching his legs out. What comfort, he thought, still wondering and scratching his head over how the behemoth's designers managed to achieve such perfect G-force protection. Suddenly, on the radar generated at the bottom of the screen, he noticed a clear change in the course of the pursued object. 2. What's going on? Report. 2. Busy calculating the rapidly changing situation, snapped out of it, immediately communicating. Preliminary calculations show that the Guardian may be heading towards the gas giant. To justify this probability, it can be inferred that he intends to hide in the planet's dense atmosphere. One focused his senses, but this time he couldn't read the potential future. Something stood in the way. His unique gift apparently wasn't working. He didn't worry too much about it. After all, he had a ship that was both a perfect shelter and a weapon at the same time. He began to watch the radar more closely, along with a close-up of the fleeing patrol ship. For a moment he thought intensely, trying to put himself in the opponent's shoes. These thoughts suggested that 2 might be right. The dense fumes of the planet's atmosphere and the eternal hurricane raging there were a very good place to visually hide a small ship. But surely the Guardian had to know that if electromagnetic field sensors were activated, he would be discovered immediately. Unless 2. Analyze the radiation level of the gas giant and determine its type. That was the only logical explanation for the direction the Guardian had taken. But surely the Guardian had to know that if electromagnetic field sensors were activated, he would be discovered immediately. Unless 2. Analyze the radiation level of the gas giant and determine its type. That was the only logical explanation for the direction the Guardian had taken. At one point, one even caught himself realizing that his level of knowledge had significantly increased in a way unknown to him, and his logical reasoning and interpretation of facts had greatly accelerated. He smiled to himself again, thinking that this new ship was having a very beneficial effect on him. After a few short moments, Tu submitted a report, informing that the gas giant generates large amounts of microwave radiation. Now one fully understood what a tough nut he had to crack. With this level of radiation, even super-sensitive penetrators could have serious difficulties locating the almost microscopic Guardian ship compared to the dimensions of the giant planet. However, he decided to wait with final conclusions until reaching the orbit of the gas giant. One thing was beyond doubt, which both of them knew. Both 1 and 2 guessed that if the Guardian flew into the dense fumes of Jupiter's atmosphere, sooner or later he would have to leave it due to the progressive radiation, which at some point would penetrate the interior of his ship, destroying the electronics, and then killing the Guardian himself. Actually, it was unknown what would get him first, except that he couldn't stay there for too long. That's exactly what 1 and 2 thought. However, both made a fundamental mistake. The rotating field of the Guardian's ship had the power to repel not only all particles of the surrounding atmosphere, but when properly configured, it became an impenetrable barrier, even for radiation. Fortunately for them, the Guardian himself also made a mistake by choosing the gas giant as his hiding place. However, neither side was aware of this yet.
The guard was still sleeping soundly as his patrol ship approached the giant planet. His body, strapped into the proper harness, hung limply, and his head, tilted back with his jaw slack, was pressed into the soft headrest. Heavy, loud snoring came from his parted lips, the kind typical of all creatures with lungs, a larynx, and a mouth. At the same time, 1, still keeping an eye on the guard ship, was constantly preoccupied with a thought that wouldn't leave him alone. After a while, however, he began to formulate a precise question for 2, realizing that this was hardly the right moment, but his nagging curiosity wouldn't let up until he asked, giving himself a sense of relief. 2 was silent for a moment, searching for the right way to interpret the issue, finally settling on the most appropriate and digestible explanation for 1. Then he began. "I was convinced you noticed the moment of dematerialization. Tell me, do you really believe that a material body made up of almost 90% water could withstand even a brief moment of acceleration reaching many Gs, practically going from 0 to nearly the speed of light in just a few dozen seconds?" I know. I figured this riddle was bothering you, so you couldn't hold out for long, even though both of us are having trouble with the guard right now. But don't worry, I assure you, I have already taken the necessary steps to minimize that problem. If I were you, though, I wouldn't worry about it anymore for now. However, your lack of knowledge is much more concerning. But believe me, there's a way to deal with that too, given the resources we have right now. And it's much faster than you might think. However, if I revealed it to you too soon and without preparation, you could experience a major shock and collapse. And I don't think either of us wants that. So get ready now for a big dose of emotions and try to handle whatever happens, remembering that everything is under my personal control. You will see and hear what until now has been a great unknown to you, at a pace and with an amount of information that in the material world would take you many years of real time to absorb and understand. Try not to panic as a result of the phenomena that are about to overwhelm you. Number 1 was practically speechless. The way and style in which this machine spoke to him clearly indicated that whatever this was, it was becoming less and less like a machine. Number 2, however, finally began to explain slowly and succinctly. That's why he abandoned the analysis of the newly encountered phenomenon and focused on the commentary coming from all sides. If I told you right now that you don't actually exist in the physical world, you'd have every right not to believe me. Because after all, everything that surrounds you right now still has its shape and form, and as you touch, say, the armrest of the chair you're lying on, you clearly feel it with your fingertips and the palm of your hand. But imagine that someone created a machine that, thanks to eons of memory capacity, can store every single tiny particle you're made of, and consequently, your entire body in the form of a digital record. Of course, it's also no problem for such a machine to replicate a model of your personality and knowledge, along with all your baggage of experience. To be more precise, such a digital clone of the original is a perfect copy of your entire physical and mental being. But I can guess your line of reasoning. It's hard for me not to, since you are contained within my memory banks. So, I know you're starting to get scared, and that's the worst thing that can happen. You'll lose your focus, and all my effort will go to waste. So don't think about that now, but rather try to feel what surrounds you at this moment. I'll try to continue, and if you don't interfere, we'll reach a happy ending. So, to maintain at least some semblance of originality, your currently scattered molecules, of which you were originally composed, have been placed in a special container surrounded by a strong magnetic field, so that not a single one can escape, and so that after rematerialization, you are reconstructed from the exact same molecules you were made of before the breakdown. Besides, you must know that the continuity of your psyche and memory is also preserved after materialization. Everything you are experiencing and remembering right now will be recreated on par with your physical body. In this way, complete physical and mental health is guaranteed. I realize it's hard for you to believe all this when at the same time you feel the air being inhaled and exhaled, the beating of your pump circulating bodily fluids, or the movement of air on your cheeks as you walk through the command center. So, if you have the courage to face the truth, we begin Lesson 1. In a moment, the command center will disappear, and you will appear in my management center, right next to me. Get ready, because this first time might not be pleasant. At that very moment, one tightened his grip on the armrests of his chair, deciding to face the new challenge. A brief flash, like an old camera flash, and he was stunned, holding on even tighter, digging his fingers into the yielding surface of the armrests. He was now half reclining next to Tu, who sat on his throne, wearing the transfer interface helmet, with system impulses flowing in and out, watching him searchingly, as if gauging whether he hadn't gone too fast in giving one the basic knowledge, for now. Well, what do you say to that? Tu asked. One looked around, up and down, levitating in his command chair, literally right next to Tu's throne. What do I say to that? I can't say. I'm particularly thrilled. Especially when I've just found out that I'm completely dead. And right now, I'm just represented by some collection of molecules. So am I shocked? Yes, I am shocked, and seriously concerned about your actions. Did it ever cross that new head of yours that I might not agree to this at all? Did you consider that I might not want this? You simply annihilated me, and you dare talk to me about new horizons. I'm dead, do you understand? dead as that last body kept in the freezer on the old ship. One continued to look around, now circling the throne podium. He didn't feel like talking anymore. Understanding and coming to terms with the situation forced upon him. Two had expected this reaction. It was a classic case of mild nervous shock. He had to admit, though, that one did very well compared to the data of other previous travelers, whose behavioral records he did possess. As soon as we reach the gas giant, I'll restore you to physical form. And don't blame me, because you were the one who gave the order. I only executed it as best as possible. Remember what you said, and you'll agree with me. Two concluded. There was another brief flash, and one breathed a sigh of relief with virtual air, seeing that he was back in the command center. This move by Two definitely made him feel better. But he had barely settled into his seat when another thought began to drill into his curious mind. How was it exactly that his old ship, designated Number 1, was so different in its level of technological execution from the one he was currently on board? After all, the time gap separating the creation of both ships wasn't that big. This technological chasm seemed strange and suspicious to him. Just as he was beginning to formulate another question for Number 2, the latter preempted him with another offer he couldn't refuse. Well, I see you're adapting quickly to the new conditions. So, I propose another lesson that will undoubtedly push you hundreds of years ahead in advanced knowledge. Hundreds of years? Cried Number 1. How is that possible? Number 2 had to answer in order to guide Number 1 to the next stage of the educational process. A time will come when you will understand much more. But for you to understand what is being conveyed to you, you must start with the basics. Remember, not everything will be said directly. Over time, as you go through successive stages of a kind of initiation, you will have to draw your own conclusions and figure out the correct answers. This will be the ultimate test of the validity of the data instilled in you. But I know in advance that your inquisitive mind will handle this sooner or later. So, prepare yourself now for a journey through time and space, into regions so strange and alien that you could never have imagined them yourself. And Number 1 traveled eons of light years, visiting the most diverse corners of the universe. He saw wondrous galaxies and giant stars. He observed quasars and pulsars up close, always accompanied by sequences of mathematical calculations and formulas. He visited a whole host of bizarre planets in exotic solar systems, where on some lush life had emerged and developed, and he learned about their complex fauna and flora. And at the very end of this journey, he was granted a trip through time and fully grasped the theory of relativity, both the basic and the fully developed version. Finally, he understood where the ships buried in the ground of the solar system's planets came from. The same ones as the one they were now chasing the Guardian with, so far ahead technologically of the only one he had arrived in. These ancient, giant objects, years old, came from the distant future. He already knew how they got here, and why. He would figure out the rest soon as the accumulated knowledge settled and stabilized in his brain, which was frantic with an excess of emotions. As soon as the educational transfer was over, one remembered the interrupted conversation with Two and realized that in all this massive dose of knowledge he had just absorbed, he had missed the answer to one of his earlier burning questions. Especially since He suspected why his recently sensitive senses weren't working, being now just a collection of loose molecules. "So, as you said, what is this machine called?" Tu answered this time without hesitation. "It's called a molecular machine, and it can do a lot more than just temporarily dematerialize the crew during flight. Many devices, as well as some types of weapons, benefit from its existence. But at this particular moment, you'll have to catch up on that knowledge at a later date, because right now we have a more important problem to solve." The Guardian's ship has just entered the atmosphere of the gas giant, disappearing from radar and penetrator readings. "In about an hour, I'll bring us into orbit around this planet. That's why I need to choose the right course of action now." At that moment, one felt strongly that he was probably no longer dealing with a soulless machine. Especially when he recalled the sight of Tu sitting on the throne, which had made a huge impression on him. From then on, he began to see him a bit like a brother and a friend. They parked near the equator in an optimal orbit. The system did what it could, straining its entire technical scanning potential, but the Guardian's ship had vanished without a trace. In the meantime, Tu asked him to close his eyes for a moment, fulfilling his earlier promise. Just as it had happened during the dematerialization, when one, in a natural reflex of closing his eyelids, missed the moment of transition to virtual existence, now he did it consciously. He felt something that could be described as a very brief tingling, especially around his back. And then it was over. Only now did he notice that he had sweated slightly, leaving damp footprints on the shiny floor of the command center. Meanwhile, the Guardian woke up to a terrible stench, discovering that he was practically swimming in his own feces. He reacted naturally to the unpleasant situation, wrinkling his nose and pulling up the full, bloated legs of his combat suit. The automatic sweat absorbers of this unique garment were working at full capacity, trying to remove the waste. And of course, they were unable to cope with the task, further heating up the material it was made of. The Guardian, if he knew how, would be cursing up a storm right now, but he only snorted and sniffled in disgust. After a moment, however, he scanned the cabin with an angry glare, looking for the nozzle of the vacuum cleaner. Once he found it, he unzipped the upper flaps, plunging the end of the flexible tube into them. He turned on the power and sucked out the waste.